Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about a book that have been really looking forward to talking about here. It's The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. The Pillars of the Earth is a long novel set in the 12th century, and revolves around the building of a cathedral in the fictional town of Kingsbridge in England. Now, I discovered this book because I'm interested in medieval history and the whole era, and so I started to look up I started to Google medieval or novels set in the Middle Ages. And of course, you think of Umberto Eco and all that, in The Name of the Rose. But so I was very curious to see what would crop up, and this book kept popping up in different searches I did, and one of the things that stood out for me was finding a page of seeing that. Well, I suppose the first time I came across the title perhaps was when I saw it on a list of favorite books of Germans in a survey that was done not so long ago. And in the introduction to the book, Follett indicates how popular the book was in Germany, and I'm not quite sure what's the great fascination particular to the Germans. But anyway, I'm not a German researcher, I'm a book reviewer. Anyway, so this book was, as I said, kept cropping up in different searches I did. So I thought, I hummed and I hawed, and I finally decided, well, we'll give this book a chance because it was so widely recommended by so many different sites. In and of itself, I mean, one of the things that you quickly, that occurs to you, well, anyone who's studied any amount of history, is that when history is popularized, it's usually brutally distorted. Yeah, there's some of that done here, but I wouldn't refer to it as brutalized by any means. The author did labor to make the book, I think, as historically accurate as possible. And his fascination was in the whole process was with the architecture, which again in the introduction to the book he indicates was his chief focus. And that passion, that interest of the authors comes through very clearly in the novel itself. So the novel follows basically the lives of several people associated with the building of the cathedral in this fictional town, and is set, as I said, in the 12th century, and concerns the chaos, the political chaos of the time, particularly of King Stephen's reign, and the civil war that extended for a great portion of that King Stephen's reign, and how the high politics of kingship and so on fits into this story of the building of the cathedral. The two stories are intertwined to some extent, and becomes quite relevant at different periods of time, and shows basically how some of the challenges that were behind building of this cathedral. So I'm not going to obviously get into too many details to spoil the story for anybody who would be interested in reading it, and I do highly recommend it. The only caution I throw in is, I mean, there's too much graphic sex in the story for my liking. I certainly can appreciate Follett's intention behind including it, the realism that it conveys, but it's not my cup of tea, and it's, I think, to some extent unfortunate that there's so much in there, because I think this book could otherwise be quite interesting for young people as well. So in terms of historical distortion and so on, again, it's very minimal when you compare it to a lot of fiction set in the Middle Ages or antiquity or what have you. There's some common medieval tropes. There's some of them, but credit to the author is that so many others are avoided. The strong woman trope is endorsed. It's a part of this story. But the sexual perversion of the clergy trope is one that's avoided. You get famines, you get robber barons, you get scheming clergy, which are obviously we're all a part of the culture of the time, the world of the time. But you also get holy monks, and you get some sympathetic portrayal of the beliefs of the monks and so on, why they're doing what they're doing. There's a lot of, okay, well, maybe I'll just spend a moment talking about the best things about the book, in my opinion. First of all, it's an interesting story. Indeed, it's a fascinating story. It's one of those books where you can't wait to get what's next. Part of the reason, of course, there's bad characters, like evil characters, and there's good characters. And you can't say that, for the most part, there's not, bad to be true. Even the heroes of the story have their flaws, and you can certainly understand why some of the bad things that happen to them follow that Aristotelian principle of it being a product of their own flaws. So that's the first thing. You care about the characters. It's an interesting, compelling story. So number two, immersion into an interesting age. The Middle Ages fascinates me, in this period of quite right in the middle of the Middle Ages, or right on the cusp of the High Middle Ages. The background of the Norman rulers of the time, how chaotic politics was at the time. For the most part, it's historically accurate, or it's as historically accurate as an author could make it, and yet make it interesting for modern readers. The roles of food production, the ever present threat of starvation, the danger of robber barons, of thieves, of travel, of the weather, of all these things. It makes you appreciate how difficult life can be and has been for people. And the third best thing about this about this book is there's so much interesting information on how how churches were made at the time. The technology, the method, the economy, the economic background. How much did it cost? What were the implications of this building project for a community or for a city or for a country? The technology, where did they learn to make churches like this? Now, I'm certainly not an expert on the history of architecture, but the story does basically follow the slow transition from Romanesque architecture to Gothic architecture. Now, of course, the author Follett doesn't use either of those terms in the book because, well, the people of the time didn't use those terms. There were definite developments, and that's part of what makes the story so interesting is this is the development of Gothic architecture from the rougher, perhaps less sophisticated Romanesque architecture of the earlier period. And so we see so much of that come through at this time. Drawbacks of the book, again, I mentioned the graphic sexuality, and some of it was poignant, some of it was, I found, a powerful or artistic device, but some of it was simply excessive, I thought. And I didn't love how the author intertwined the sort of the final stages of the book with the fight between King Henry and Thomas Becket. I can't really come up with a great reason why I didn't like that. I suppose simply because the story of Thomas Becket is perhaps too well known, and thus I didn't find it as interesting, but perhaps that might be the exact opposite for another reader. I don't know. But anyway, this book has two other, you couldn't say sequels, perhaps that's not the right word. I understand that the two other novels that Follett wrote that focus on this town of Kingsbridge and the cathedral, I understand they can be read independently of each other, but I can't say anything about that. But I'm pretty sure that in time I will try the next novel in the series. And again, it's not precisely a series. So in the end, this was a very worthwhile read, and if you're interested in the Middle Ages in any way, shape, or form, if you are interested in how people lived in a harder time than our own, then I definitely recommend this book, and I think you will find it to be truly interesting. Thank you.